First, I wanted to say thank you for being so accessible and such a guidance to a huge number of students taking the LSAT and being so optimistic as well. And so I want to start with a couple questions. The first one was, what trends are you actually seeing in the types of flaws being tested in LR?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that the LSAT has always de-emphasized the classic logical fallacies. Studying lists of those fallacies is useful to some extent, but most of the flaws on the LSAT don't really fit into any kind of neatly defined category. Instead, they're simply failing to consider something, which is unique to that argument in particular. And so I would think about the arguments not so much in a regimented formal sense as in just a real world common sense approach and pointing out what did they fail to consider or what did they not bother to explicitly state.
Absolutely, that makes sense. And then, so do you see any types of these trends of flaws being tested, or would you say it's pretty up in the air?
I don't think there's any particular trends. I think overall the LSAT's just getting harder. And so the flaws might be a little bit more difficult to spot. And as always, I would say study the most recent LSATs because those are the best indication of where the LSAT currently stands. I think if you were to thoroughly study everything from the exams in the 60s through the 80s, you would be in a good position to tackle anything you come across.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. My second question was for reading comprehension. So now that the test is digital and test takers are kind of finding it difficult to mark up the passage text because it's not exactly intuitive on the screen, it may take a bit more time than using a highlighter on paper. How do you recommend that test takers do mark up RC or even using the scratch paper to do so?
Yeah, I would always keep it really minimal. And that was my recommendation even for the paper LSAT. And so for the digital LSAT, even more so, I would use the scratch paper to simply write down a couple of keywords describing the main idea, the author's opinion, if any, maybe a phrase or two describing the different viewpoints within the passage, but that's pretty much it. So I wouldn't write more than, let's say, 15 to 20 words total associated with reading comp. And I wouldn't use any of those tools like the highlighting or underlining because they don't work that well.
Absolutely. All right, those are the questions that I can prepare with for today.
Well, do you want to share a little bit more about your situation when you're taking the LSAT? And we'll see if there's anything we can unpack there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So my name's Angela. I am from Chicago. I took the LSAT most recently in October, and my score came out to a 150. So it is pretty solid, but that was kind of me actually using, guidance and work that you had prepared and put up on the LSAT blog that I found extremely helpful. And now I have sought out the help of a really wonderful tutor who's going to help me boost that score quite a bit. And my next test date is going to be in January.
Okay, great. And what are some of the weak areas or struggles you're facing? I know you mentioned logical reasoning and reading comp in your initial questions, but are there any particular struggles you're facing in terms of how to approach those sections or any weak areas you've noticed?
Yeah, absolutely. I've noticed. So what I would do is I would take kind of the sections or even a whole comprehensive test timed, and then I'll go over it again a second time untimed to kind of see where I went wrong or see where I would have changed my answer if I had a bit more time to think things through. So with logical reasoning, I found a lot of my questions dealing with if the word was a bit, or the concept was a bit ambiguous, and so you had to kind of go back and forth between stimulus and answer to match up, oh, by concept they mean this, or by the opposite they mean this. So it's using ambiguous language in the answers. Additionally, in logical reasoning where they would take kind of two elements in the stimulus. Let's say they're doing an argument, you're trying to find the flaw of the argument. So let's say they take those two elements, but then in the answer, they actually switch them. So looking at cause and effect and how you can actually spot those different patterns and answers and easily eliminate those to find the correct one.
Good. I mean, it sounds like your review process is fairly in depth and you're looking at exactly where your mistakes stemmed from and then seeing whether phrases in the stimulus and the answer choice, they truly match and are equivalent in meaning or not. So I think it sounds like you're doing all the right things there.
Thanks. I've had a bit of help, so.
Good. That's good to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of fitting in the time over the next, we've got about 6 weeks remaining until the January LSAT at the moment. What's your schedule like in terms of taking full length exams as you get closer?
Absolutely. I would say I typically reserve like the last few weeks before the test to really just do at least one entire prep test each day, just to kind of get myself back into that pattern and back to that habit, and kind of get into the mode of, okay, here I am with the test, and here I'm going to be sitting here for like a couple hours. At least just kind of doing it. And then before that, I'm just still reviewing all the weak points that I have. But do you have any recommendations for that practice?
Yeah, I do. So you said one test per day.
At least, at least.
Okay, so that's something I would want to discuss with you a little bit, because to me that runs the risk of burnout.
Oh, okay.
And you're saying at least one per day, which means you might do
Yeah.
more, which I think is really potentially too much. I don't want you to burn out. I don't want you to get sick of this. I don't want you to exhaust yourself.
Right.
The value in doing these exams is not simply to measure yourself. It's to make mistakes so that you can then review them and learn from them to avoid making them again.
Oh, okay.
Now, if you're taking one exam per day, that's about 3 hours or so. Then reviewing it might take another 3 hours at least. So that's 6 hours of work per day, which is really the max I would ever recommend. But if you're doing those full sittings again and again on consecutive days, it's going to get exhausting. I mean, even for me, when I'm doing a full-length 5-section exam, my brain is still fried by the end. And so I would say maybe take an exam at most every other day. And then on the days in between, you could review it, but also sprinkle in a day off here or there, especially in the final month. I mean, you're not looking to radically learn something new. This is not a test that you can cram for. Maybe you'll get better with the pacing and endurance, and maybe you'll learn to spot some more of the patterns underlying this exam. But I wouldn't take all these exams just to get through some arbitrary number.
Absolutely. That makes sense. And I'm happy to do that.
Good. And also the bonus there is that you could save some recent exams for a potential retake. And I know that the retake is the last thing you might want to do, especially since you said you've taken the LSAT already. But it never hurts to have a few in the bank just in case. So don't feel like you have to get through every single exam.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then for logic games, how would you recommend, this is kind of more of a basic question, but how would you recommend with the time limit, what is your recommendation for kind of processing different logic games, especially if you run into one problem that you think, oh no, I'm kind of freaking out right now. Should I keep kind of move on and come back? Or what kinds of questions should we leave for later?
Yeah, sure. So within a single game, oftentimes I would save the global, general, must be true, cannot be true sorts of questions for last, because it's possible that other questions will lead you to draw new hypothetical scenarios that could then help you better solve more efficiently those general global questions. So that's within a game. And then in terms of games in general that throw you for a loop, the so-called curveball games, those weird ones that have been showing up with increasing frequency talking about trends, that's the biggest trend I see, is more weird curveball games. And the way you avoid being in that situation is that you simply do lots of weird curveball games now so that nothing can really surprise you, and that you're able to adapt to those unfamiliar situations, recognizing that even if the initial main diagram may look different, or it may be some sort of different game type, the underlying principles for logic games still apply, making inferences, holding these abstract rules in your head, and applying them again and again to different situations. And I have a list of those curveball games that I can send you that covers every exam ever released. And so that'd be a good place to work. And that's the nice thing about doing fewer exams, maybe doing one exam or two exams per week only, is that you then free up time to do more drills like this, to work on weird curveball games exclusively, or to work on tough logical reasoning flaw questions exclusively for a study session if you want.
Absolutely. And you're totally right. That is indeed a trend that I've seen as well. So I would so appreciate if you sent me those.
Yeah, of course.
And then with our last few minutes here, I had a last question for you, if that's all right. So in terms of practicing for logic games, would you recommend kind of doing kind of like a streamline of multiple games at once, or kind of spacing them out as you recommended for the general prep test as well?
So once you've already built a strong foundation in each of the different major LSAT game types, like ordering, grouping, combinations, you could then spend some time on the weird games, like I said, with the big list, or you could work on mapping, pattern, circle, those rare game types. You could choose to focus on those exclusively for a day or two. Or at that point, once you've built a strong foundation, you could just do individual timed sections of logic games. In my study plans, I will have you work through games by type first, just to better understand what each type involves and the common diagramming techniques for each one. But I gather that you're already past that. And at this point, you're better off either focusing on weird games for a bit or just doing individual timed sections.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That's been very helpful.
My pleasure, Angela. What would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
Oh my goodness, definitely how to pace oneself in terms of leading up to the test, especially in the last few weeks, and kind of like not avoiding burnout and making sure that you're absorbing most information that you can effectively, but not in mass quantity.
Great. Well, it was a pleasure connecting with you. Please keep in touch and let me know if you need anything as you move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for everything, Steve.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.